Hello, everybody. Welcome to this special episode of Two Bye Guys, the best of 2024, a little clip show. I saw other people doing this and wasn't going to, but then suddenly decided, why not? Let's do that. I want to do that. These are not necessarily the best clips of 2024. How could I possibly pick the best? I love all my guests equally, but these are just some clips that I found recently that really resonated with me, that I've been thinking about a lot, and that I thought might be nice for you all to reflect on as we move into 2025. Two Bye Guys, Buy One Bye Guy will be back in 2025 very soon, probably by the end of January. I'm thinking of trying a new thing this season, which is not having a strict schedule, just recording and posting when it's in flow for me, like I am doing today on a Tuesday, or maybe you'll hear this Wednesday. I'm not even sure. I don't know when I'll post it. I'm just going to do what feels right. Usually, I do about 2 seasons per year, about 20 episodes. So I'm still going to aim for that, but maybe just on a less regular schedule. I did weekly episodes last season. I think earlier in the year, bi weekly. I'm going to just try it whenever it feels right. So let me know what you think. If that really messes up your listening schedule and it's a terrible idea, let me know. But I think it might work. We'll see. I've also been on a plant medicine journey this year. That feels like the big change and defining new addition to my life in 2024. And I'm excited to keep that journey going in 2025. I only mention it because it feels so connected to all the work that I've been doing here. It's been really amazing and really healing, but it feels so connected to the podcast, to my book, to my coaching practice. So it's going to be intertwined into what we talk about here. It also feels very connected to my queerness in general. It feels connected to my spirituality, my Judaism, although the spirituality of the plant medicine is definitely non-denominational. I have felt like I've connected with a higher power, but it is a singular higher power. It doesn't matter what religion you are, it's something we can all tap into. It's been really transformative for me. The plants have really confirmed for me that gender is a construct, sexual fluidity is totally normal and natural, and that everything flows from love. And I know we all have to get there ourselves. I don't want you to just take my word for it, but it does feel for me to share my experience like for the past 10 years, I've been reflecting, going to therapy, learning, studying, doing group work, building up this framework in my head about how the world is and how I want the world to be and what my place is in it. And it's all been making a lot of sense in my head. And now the plant medicine has finally allowed me to actually step into that world for real, to feel the truth of that framework in my body, to have confidence in that vision, to quiet the doubts and the worries that I often have. So if this is something you're working on, feeling things that you know in your head and feeling them in your body, that's definitely something I'll be talking more about on this podcast. It's also something we can talk about in coaching or on a coaching call. And feel free to ask me about plant medicine, and I can tell you about the power of that. A few quick announcements before we get into it. I am working on some new coaching offerings in 2025. My practice has got off to an amazing start in 2024. I love doing this work. It's really fulfilling, and I'm finding it's coming more and more naturally. I'm leaning into my intuition. I've loved the process and seeing my clients make so much progress. You can check out some new testimonials on my website, robertbrookscohen.com/coaching, see what other people have experienced. I've been receiving coaching as well and learning a lot from that. That's been a wonderful journey. I really do think coaching can be so powerful, whatever you want to work on. Having someone to talk to and having accountability is so helpful. It makes sure that you move forward and you don't stay still. So I am working on some things I've been learning about from my other coaches. I'm working on an email course that will be available soon, as well as an asynchronous coaching model that I participated in. It was really helpful for me. So stay tuned for some new coaching offerings in 2025. But the most value is still the one-on-one sessions with me. Right now, I have about 8 active clients. I have bandwidth for about 10. So I've been running a holiday special on individual coaching. My pricing was set to go back to normal in 2025. But since I've got room for 2 or 3 more clients right now, I'm going to extend that pricing for a little bit longer. If you book an intro call with me anytime between today and January 10th, I will honor that pricing. And you can see that pricing on my website, robertbrookscohen.com. So if you're listening to this on time and you've been thinking about doing a call with me, now's the time to sign up. Until January 10th, you get that discount pricing. It's a 25-minute free intro call. You can book it on my website. Absolutely no pressure or obligation to sign up for coaching. We can just get to know each other, talk about what we would work on in coaching. You'll get a little taste of what it's like to talk to me, and then you can decide. Okay, that's all I'll say on that. Let's get to the best of Two Buy Guys Buy One Buy Guy 2024. We'll start with 2 short clips from book season. My book came out a little over a year ago, and we were still airing episodes with the subjects of my book at the beginning of 2024. Many of my coaching clients come to me now to talk about their relationships or their marriages, obviously because I wrote a book about it. And will the marriage survive is often a big question. And much of the time, people can work through these identity challenges within a marriage. And sometimes these challenges reveal that the marriage has run its course. So I'm going to start today with 2 clips on each side of that coin. The first is with Nana. Nana is so hilarious. I love his honesty and the way he talks about these things. In this clip, he talks about coming out to his future wife and being honest, being really, really honest with your partner. And the other side of that, believing your partner's experience and trusting them when they tell you what they're thinking and what they're going through and not doubting them. I really love this part of the interview. And then on the flip side, I'll share a clip from Austin. I love Austin. He's very special to me. His story is really fascinating. I've learned so much from it over the years. He and his wife worked on these issues for a while, but they eventually did decide to get divorced, which has been an empowering decision for them. In this clip, Austin talks about finding himself and really connecting to himself without living with his wife. And they also talk about changing the container of their love, that there's still a lot of love between them, but that marriage wasn't the right container for it anymore. And I also liked in this clip something that's really resonated with me is that marriage isn't a failure, quote, just because it ends, that the goal shouldn't be to stay married until we die. The goal should be a fulfilling relationship that fills you both up. So in this clip, Austin talks about why they decided to get divorced, what's changed since they divorced in their relationship, and in Austin looking inward and finding himself. And they talk a little about telling the story of your relationship and how difficult that can be when you're not on the same page, but also how empowering it can be to get to tell your own story and live in that truth. So here's 2 clips, Nana and then Austin. See you on the flip side. When you proposed, were you out to yourself or her as bisexual? And if not, how did that happen?
I told her. I'll say it that way. I told her, and she says she understood what I was saying, and that she was glad I gave her the vocabulary because the word bisexual didn't apply sexually in Italian. You say something is bisexual in Italian, you're talking about suits. You're talking about a clothing item that a male or female could wear, not a sexuality. So I did tell her before I proposed to her. It was, we were laughing and joking about something. And I think it was one of those things where guys always say, "Hey, baby, I want to see you with another girl." La 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 la. You know, we're disgusting that way, and that was somehow in the conversation. And she said, "Well, you ever do it with another guy?" And I had a come to Jesus moment. It's like, you know, and I said to myself, I'm like, you know, you like this girl, and if this keeps going the way it is, she's going to be around for the long haul. You got to get this out of the way. You got to have this conversation now. And so I did. I said, yes, I have. I've seen one up close. And it ain't that bad. I kind of had fun with it. I missed the experience, to be perfectly honest. I said, but right now I'm not curious about anyone else because all I can see in my life is you. Man, that was the right answer. I proposed to her on her birthday after that conversation. And
Cool.
that's how we got
Amazing.
proposed to, and that's how it came out to her.
And was she accepting of your bisexuality throughout, or did it ever cause conflict or struggle between you?
That's weird. Okay, so bi erasure is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when you don't know, especially when you're dealing with men, apparently, um, I guess the idea of a man actually being bisexual is an affront to everybody's sensibilities. My wife had to work through that. For the longest time, she thought I was gay and wearing her as a beard.
Mm.
Um, really, and there's the impact that had on me was, let's just say I'm still working through those challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, um, yeah, that was rough. That was a rough period.
Yeah. And how, I mean, I know there's many steps and probably a long process involved, but how did you work through those things and communicate with each other?
Honestly, this is just couples advice at this point. Is I believe the shit that she said, and she believed me. That's what it boiled down to. We just had to start
Mm.
believing what the other person was telling them. And when we took those steps, a lot of the challenges went away. Or maybe not
Mm.
so much went away, just became more manageable. Like, if I don't have to prove I'm not gay all the time, then I don't feel like I'm being inauthentic. Because performative
Right.
masculinity is the absolute worst. You're not even being a
Yeah.
real man at that point. You're just pretending.
Right.
You're just pretending to be a real man. And that inauthenticity, it messes with you up here, in here, down there. It
Yeah.
ruins everything. It doesn't stop breaking stuff. So
Right.
that when I got over that hump, it was like, oh yeah, it's life is so much better now. And it
Mm.
was for her as well. But there was a lot of crying that had to happen before we got there.
Yep. I love that. And you're not the only person in the book to basically say that exact same thing of that, like, you have to be honest with your partner, but there's the flip side of that coin is like, you have to believe your partner, both partners. And if you can't believe them, if you can't trust them, why? Dive into that, figure out why. But you kind of have to get to the place where you believe each other, because otherwise you're trying to prove things to her, to yourself. And when you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to prove something, you're not really being yourself. You're trying to be a certain thing. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I know we talked about that. We talked about the performance anxiety that I've felt, that many men in the book have felt, because like sex shouldn't be about proving anything. It should be about pleasure and fun. And so, yeah, I love that answer. But I want to ask this because I remember when we first talked on the podcast and for the book, like, you were in that marriage and the idea of leaving it was scary. And how did you reconcile that? And like, how do you look at it now that you're out of the marriage? Like, how do you look back at how difficult it was to confront this with that possibility that the marriage could end?
Mm. Oh, this is an interesting question because I mean, when you're in a marriage, you're two separate people, but sort of in Christian narrative that I was taught, you become one. And so, and I think there's a tendency, and I don't think this is what is meant by becoming one within the Christian tradition, but people lose their sense of self and they end up deferring to each other. And I know I did that in my marriage. So I was when I think a lot of the fear of that ending was, who am I without her?
Mhm.
And so, um, so that's been a real journey, which is it's been exciting because I all of a sudden realized that, oh, there's these parts of me that I've sort of pushed down just out of deference to her, and it was because I loved her and because I was committed to her. But nonetheless, there was a part of myself that I said, okay, well, this can be put to the side, and all of a sudden there's we're no longer together, and I'm even thinking about another relationship. I'm like, well, I can define how it looks. Like I can say what I want, and I can, and
Mhm.
so that in a way is a bit of a freedom. Um, the other thing that's kind of difficult is, I mean, so one thing we are my ex-wife and I, we still run a business together, and we're still parenting together. Our youngest son is 19 years old, so it's not like there's custody issues or anything. But um, so we have a lot of contact with each other. And one of the frameworks that we looked at was that we're changing the container of our love because we both really wanted to maintain the friendship. And
Mhm.
that was a really sort of, for me, that was that was really helpful with the transition. Just having a framework to say, okay, this is not a failure of a marriage.
Yeah.
This is a successful marriage,
Yeah.
and um, and we're not failures of people. I think the narrative that I grew up with was that if somebody got divorced in a marriage, then um, it's a failed marriage,
Right.
and and that's reinforced by culture with like your silver anniversary and then your gold anniversary. I mean, like it gets uh, more and more
Yeah.
precious as the years go on. And I understand relationships are more precious, and I really value those who've gone before me that have really nurtured their relationships and grown together in love through that time. So um, I think I got side railed on the question.
No, that's okay. We can
Okay,
talk.
okay,
Let me ask you something, and
yeah,
there's a lot to talk about, but
yeah,
I want to say, like, talking to you over these years has really helped evolve my thinking on this too. And it's also, I think I quoted Dan Savage in the book. He talks about how we look at relationships like the only measure of success is, does it last until one of you dies?
yeah.
And that, why is that the measure of success? There's so
Mm,
many people sticking it out when it's not healthy or good for them, and is that actually successful?
yeah,
And how can we look at, what a relationship is,
yeah,
however long it lasts, in its current form? And yours isn't over, it just changed. The container changed, as
yeah,
you said.
yeah,
And I just find that beautiful. And I wish that that idea could spread more, because it's very ingrained in us, the
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
What I'm curious though, like, since I last saw you, because I actually, when we met in person, I met your wife
yeah.
also. You had already decided you were going to split, but I could clearly see a lot of love between
Mm,
you.
yeah,
Uh, it was quite special
yeah,
to see,
yeah.
actually, in such an unusual way, unusual
Right,
circumstances.
right.
What's it been like, your relationship, since you've decided to split? Like, get how do you deal with that? I mean, it must be tricky, but I'm not sure how.
Yeah, I
What's
I
it been like?
So I think what we've done is we no longer process things with each other emotionally. So I mean, even though we're friends, I feel the fact that we were married and that there's a necessary distance. And so as we're processing, I think each of us comes up with sort of a narrative that makes sense of the past. And those narratives aren't going to necessarily line up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we each are sort of on this healing journey, and I've seen that in her, and I celebrate that. And I mean, and there's steps that she's taking that just give me a lot of joy, because I know that she's stepping into a life that is really filling her in a way that didn't happen while we were married. And I was yeah, it gives me a lot of joy. um and there's a part of me, though, that wants to control that narrative, like for both of us, but instead of just letting it
Right.
go and saying, okay, yeah, I mean, I she may see things a little differently than I, and I may see things a little bit differently than her, but it doesn't make one of us right or one of us wrong. It just, for me, that it's just part of that letting go. um
Yeah.
and and yeah, and I mean, this coming Christmas will be the first Christmas that, like, I'll be visiting her house with the kids, and it will be a little bit interesting.
Mm-hmm.
um so I think there's this story in my head of how I want us to appear a certain way, like this successful divorce story. um I realize that's not going to be the truth. I mean, that's not going to be how it is necessarily, and that if I try to fit myself into that story, um, it's not going to go well. I think, I won't be listening to myself. But if I just sort of am in integrity with myself as I enter into the relationship with her, with the kids, I feel like that's all I can do. And to force a narrative is not going to be helpful.
Right. It reminds me a lot of like work I'm doing for myself of like wanting to control other people and control the narrative of a relationship,
Yeah.
and you can't, there's clearly an awareness like you can't really control someone else or their view of things. You
Right.
can only show up with your best energy and your most authentic self. And yeah, like in some ways an intimate relationship is, are we telling the same story? Like
Yeah.
that was Nana and Austin. I love both of them. Thank you so much for participating in the book and in the podcast. Next, here's a clip from R.K. Russell. I got to interview him a second time. He's the first out as bisexual football player in the NFL. He wrote a book that we talked about this season. In this clip, he talks about how even though coming out was sort of the ending of his book, it actually has been a new beginning, and it opens up all these other possibilities and challenges. So we talked through that. He also talks about coming out as a gradual and non-binary process, how you almost have to do some of it before you fully realize what it is. Sometimes you stumble into it. It works out how it works out, but it's your story. And I really loved when he talks about trusting the process, how when he came out to his mom, it didn't seem great at first, but no feeling lasts forever, no moment lasts forever. And there's beauty in giving people time and space on their journey, and then also doing the same for yourself. Give yourself time and space and trust the process. So here's a clip from R.K. Russell. Enjoy. Last time you were here was August 2020. You were just starting to write and pitch that book, and I remember you had mentioned that you wanted to write a memoir. So, what's happened since then? Like, what was the process of the book like, and what did you learn about yourself as you wrote it?
I mean, Geez, 2020. I'm like, I was just a little baby bisexual at that point. I was like a year out.
Yeah.
Yeah, the dream of wanting to write a book was so romanticized in my mind and so glamorous. And I mean, it is those things, but it was also one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. And that's coming from someone who played multiple years in the NFL. It was a labor of love. It was both excruciating and extremely rewarding. I think to be able to take a step back from your life and look at it in this very um, intimate and reflective and in deep an honest way is something that I want or I hope for everyone. It's very rare, especially as men, that we really stop to reflect on our traumas, on our past, on our relationships that we've had with other people and with ourselves,
Mhm.
especially as a bi person who lives in a heteronormative world or society, who has compartmentalized so many parts of his own life and experience. It was so healing to see it all as a whole in this one piece of work. I realized that even in outside of just my dating life, even with personal life and work, I've separated so many parts of myself. And this
Mm.
book physically made me put them all together and see me as one whole person. Uh, so it was extremely healing. And
Mm.
there's days when you get up and you don't want to write, and there's days where you stay up and you can't stop writing, where it
Uh-huh.
becomes kind of a compulsion. But it's all in all, I think, is one of the greatest accomplishments in my life as well. And I want to write another book. I have continued to want to write books, so it has not scared me off. Anyone that has a desire to write a book, I say go for it. It will only make you a better person and have a better understanding and relationship with yourself, which I think we all could use.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that, and I'm glad to hear all that. And I know what you mean. The writing the book is like, oh my god, it's a years long process. You don't even
Mhm.
realize like how much time it actually takes to sit down and do it, and then revise it, and then revise it again.
Yes. Oh God.
But what you're saying makes so much sense because I found it to be quite an easy read in the sense that you're so direct and you're so like open and vulnerable that it's just a page turner. Like it really is so clear. And so whatever work you did to
Mhm.
get that clarity and write it so simply, you're not obfuscating, you're not hiding things.
Thank
And
you.
so I really liked the style of it. It's just
Thank
very,
you,
very
which I
direct.
appreciate. Which is also that's also like a whole nother thing that's kind of jarring as a writer. Like you said, we spend years sometimes writing books, and then
Mhm.
like I put this book out in May 16, 2023. May 17th, people were DMing or messaging or commenting me, just finished, couldn't put it down. I'm like, it took
Wow.
me a year to write this, and you read it in a day. I'm like, really? Like, it's the biggest compliment, but I'm also like, wow,
Yeah, right.
it's done.
That's amazing, but it's also like you could take a little more time and
Yeah,
digest it a
I'm
little more.
I'm like, I don't know. Read it again. I don't know. They're like, when's the next book? I'm like, okay, this is wild. But no, thank you. I do appreciate that.
That's funny. That's funny. Actually, I wanted to ask you, and I want to get to that idea of bringing all the parts of yourself together. That's like the big theme I noticed that I loved. But before that, you mentioned the response. Like, what we talked last time. It was about a year after you came out very publicly in this ESPN article, first by football player. Now we're about a year out from when you published this book. We're a
Mhm.
little late, but better late than never. What has the overall response been? And like, you really let people in an even bigger way than just saying you're bi. You let them into all this, a lot of other stuff and personal stories and trauma and healing. What's it been like to share that, and how has the response felt?
The response, I mean, has been so amazing and so welcoming for me, which was kind of the same thing with coming out. I mean, people really have gotten to know me on a deeper level, and I've in my experience, when you allow people to know you, you allow people to love and support you. When you now allow people to know you deeply, you allow for them to care for you deeply. and that's kind of what has happened with me in my story. It's
Mm.
also going beyond like the headline, right? Like so many times in the limited representation that we have for queer people, for people of color, for women, the affirmation or the coming out or the grandstand is like the ending. I even felt that
Yeah.
with my coming out. It was like I came out and it was like you did the thing, and okay, it's over. And that's not the case. A lot of it doing the thing, yeah, there's a process to get there, but that's like the beginning. There's beauty in telling the process, which is this book, and there's also so much work to be done after, which is still the life I'm pursuing now. And it's important to humanize these topics. It's important to see people beyond the headlines, and I think books allow you to represent people that are underrepresented and allow people that don't look like you or know your experience to kind of have that olive branch and have that experience. You know, you might be
Hmm.
tweeting about something that you don't have the experience of, and this allows you to come at that with more empathy. It's no longer
Hmm.
just a talking point. It's you see it as a person, a heartbeat, something that lives and breathes and bleeds. And you know, that's something I think as a society we could all use more of is
Mm.
empathy. So the response has been great.
Yeah.
That's kind of like all the little things. My book has also been optioned by Sony Pictures and Gabrielle Union to be turned into a TV show. So that's kind
Yay.
of, I say go beyond the headlines. I'm like, that's kind of like the big headline of
Yeah.
of this.
Yeah.
And I'm excited. I'm excited to take this story and bring it to a different medium and continue to be a storyteller. I'm co-executive producing with Gabrielle Union,
Yeah.
co-writing. So I also get to write more and in different forms. So the book continues to change my life. The more that I share, the more my life continues to grow, and that's just been awesome for me. It's been amazing.
Cool. That's so awesome. Yeah, I love the second act for you or second out of many. And like I had heard that news about the it getting picked up for development. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, yeah, I could see this as a series. Like there's so many vivid scenes and I don't know how you're gonna write it, but I can imagine it jumping back and forth to the childhood stuff and then the NFL stuff. If you need ideas, let me know. Uh, but that the thing about coming out, let's talk about that because
Mhm.
it also makes a lot of sense, and I like the way you phrased it, like it's allowing people to know you and love you deeper. And I think what before we've come out, it often feels like this burden on us that we have to overcome, and we don't often think about the positive effects and the joy on the other
Yeah.
side, and the gift it is that you're
Mhm.
giving to other people. And so I have a lot of quotes from your book that I want to, I'll just share a few of them, but I liked how you wrote about coming out, and you wrote the process of living my truth was gradual. And you wrote about sort of practicing by coming out to strangers or coming out on a date here and there as bisexual, and that you wrote saying it with pride. Each exposure gave me confidence. And it's like this, I identified with that step by step process. And then what I want to ask you about is coming out to your mom, because it's such a beautiful scene. And there's a part earlier in the book where you're not ready to come out to her. And you said, you still didn't fully understand it. And so you
Mhm.
weren't ready yet to share it, which makes sense. Like it's hard when you're still figuring it out.
Yeah.
But then later, the ESPN article sort of set a deadline for coming out to your mom. You had to do it before she found out from the
Yeah.
press, which I was also basically my coming out story. I recorded a TV show coming out, and it was coming
Mhm.
out 6 months later. So then I had 6 months to tell everyone. So can you tell us like a little what it was like coming out to your mom, and tell us, or to other people in general? But that
Oh
story
my
was really
gosh.
beautiful.
Yes. I mean, to speak to the first half, coming out being this gradual thing, um, I do believe as humans we are creatures of experience. The reason coming out is so hard is because before we even understand truly who we are, or really have not even understand it, before we have the vocabulary to say we're bisexual, or to claim an identity, or to be educated about this identity, because there's very few and far resources for us as young people to be educated on it. Or they don't allow us those resources when we're young. we have so many experiences that are innately homophobic, that are innately telling us this is wrong, you don't want to be this, that are misogynistic, that are sexist. So you already have all of those built up negative experiences. My attempt as an adult who was determined to then claim my identity with pride was to create hopefully positive experiences, to have these micro dates or experiences of claiming identity and being proud. And not every date had to be magical for it to be a positive experience, but just someone being like, oh, okay, that's cool, like
Mm.
what else? Like, what do you like? Tell me more about yourself. And that in and of itself, to understand that you can say the thing and still be seen as human and whole and loved and accepted, and the ground won't open you up and swallow you whole, or everyone in the restaurant isn't looking at you, and it's not this
Mm.
big scary daunting thing, that life exists beyond this fear. And like you said,
Yeah.
that there is joy and love and connection beyond that there's actually this wall that you've put up that isn't only detrimental to you but to everyone in your life, because you're not allowing them to get to know you, or the light that shines in you is not being shined on everyone. So that was kind of my gradual attempt.
Hmm.
The coming out to my mom and setting the deadline is kind of how I was living my life back then. I very much was like collision course planning,
Yeah.
which we do the best that we can with the things that we have. So that
Uh-huh.
was looking back. I'm like, okay, probably not the best, but we got there. And me and my mother, we are so close. She's my best friend. We talk every day on the phone for at least an hour, minimum. She loves me inside and out. And I wasn't a question of whether she would love me or not. I think for me, it was just, I felt almost guilt that I hadn't shared it with her earlier. It felt like, I don't know. She had done so much for me, and we had shared so much. It felt at one point irrelevant, and also at one point like I had held it so long that I had made it this thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
um, but it was time. And when I finally did share, it was on a phone call the day before this huge interview was about to drop. So it was also like, of course, she would go into shock. It's like you hear this big thing about the person that you're closest to in your life, that you literally held in your womb and created. Then the whole world's about to know in less than 24 hours. Then
Hmm.
so it, it was really the perfect storm. Uh, but we got there. She, I don't want to spoil things if anyone hasn't read the book yet. Her initial reaction was not the greatest. It wasn't the worst. But she had concerns as a mother. I tell people all the time, at that point, I was 27. It had taken me 27 years to get to that point. I'd given my mother like 5 minutes of a phone call to try to get to that point.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
It wasn't, she wasn't going to do the 27 years of work I had done in that 5 minutes. But I will say, um, my mother did fortunately come around quickly. I'm so fortunate that we're able to show a journey that a parent cannot say the perfect thing and
Hmm.
can learn and
Yeah.
can lead with love and can come back and be stronger than ever. And I think to me that's more valuable because that's a little more real and a little more relatable for a lot of people. Of course, you would love
Yeah.
to say the perfect thing, but we're not
Right.
perfect people.
No, that's what I thought too, and that's what I thought was so beautiful about it was that, like, the first conversation was, like, it wasn't the worst. It wasn't like, she was saying mean things to you, but she was scared,
Yeah.
and, she was worried for you, and that's,
Mhm.
understandable, and then later, there's that conversation where she kind of basically says, like, "I'm sorry for how I reacted. I was scared," and she
Yeah.
explains it, and you have this, once you've both processed this deeper connection, which I thought was beautiful and very resonated with my story too. Like, my mom was supportive, but she was kind of sad I couldn't tell her sooner. And there was
Mhm.
that kind of rupture. And also what you said earlier about coming out to other people, like, yeah, it's cool when you come out and they're supportive or they don't care, and it's like, okay, cool. But it's also kind of helpful when you get a bad reaction and you get through it and you survive and
Yeah.
you realize, okay,
Yeah.
I'm still me, and like their bad reaction is on them, and I've learned something
Yes.
about them.
Yes, it's easier when the people are kind of like a little more two dimensional in your life. And you're just
Yeah,
like, oh, okay, you're kind of like a person I wouldn't want in my life anyway. I think when
right.
it's like family or people that are so cemented, the decision isn't
It's
that
hard.
easy to just be like,
Right,
oh, okay, well, I don't really want to associate with someone like that anyway.
right,
This is like,
right,
okay, you are like a pillar in my life.
right. Then you have to have those multiple
Yeah.
conversations and really process it and help them through it sometimes.
Mhm.
But it's hard. That was R.K. Russell. Next up is a clip from Lisa Spidell. She wrote a book that is not out yet, but will be out soon. I know because she just told me she finished it and sent it to the publisher. I'm really excited for her book to come out. It's called Bisexuality Beyond Binaries. I'm in the book a little. A lot of other guests on this podcast are in the book. It's going to be a great book. I'll let you know when it comes out. In this clip with Lisa, we talked a little bit about evolution and the science of bisexuality and why we shouldn't need it to for these things to be valid, but for some people we do. And then what I really wanted to share is this clip about pleasure. And Lisa has taught a class on pleasure activism. So in this clip, she talks about how we often downplay pleasure, and we really shouldn't. Pleasure is great. It's like kind of what makes us human and makes us alive, and we should experience it. And she also talks about how it's not just sexual pleasure that we downplay, but all kinds of pleasure. And we focus sometimes on achievement and success, and pleasure is actually quite important too. So here's a clip with Lisa Spidell.
Erasure was just such a huge theme, but it's not the same for everybody. And that was really where I'm saying multiple bisexual identities is to talk about how bisexuality is experienced is really different based on different identities. It's made sense of very differently. Treatment of bisexual people can look really different, as particularly when there's intersections of racism and ableism and transphobia. So all the isms, and so that's the multiple, right?
Yeah.
I didn't want to make it a monolith. I didn't want to say this is the bisexual experience, right? Because it's so different for multiple reasons. Um, Even though there's the common theme of erasure, that erasure looks different too and can play out differently. But it's
Right.
still this discrediting, like it's not real, it's invalid, it's a
Right.
phase.
Right.
People don't get that you can, it's difficult for a lot of folks that you can be attracted to more than one gender.
Yeah, right. I identify with so much of what you're saying, and like I was
Yeah.
a psychology major in college too, and I was really interested in this stuff. I took a whole class on human sexuality, and bisexuality. I don't remember hearing much about it. I remember hearing about how like homosexuality might be a byproduct of other things and how it's not evolutionarily advantageous, like why does it exist, and we would talk about stuff like that, but we never heard about bisexuality and the possible evolutionary advantage of that, which I did an episode with Elliot Schrafer, who wrote a book about bisexuality in the animal kingdom, and they're finding it more and more and finding that it actually has evolutionary advantages in terms of passing on, the next generation.
So
And
now
we
it's
know,
legitimate because it's all about evolution, right?
yeah, well, there's that too. Right. We don't
That's so
necessarily
cool.
need an evolutionary argument to see bisexuality
Right.
in humanity and have a reason for it other than, pleasure or other things. Right. Is that what you kind of mean by that?
Well, I meant like, yeah, like, oh, okay, now we can take it seriously if there's an evolutionary purpose. I
Uh,
mean, it's kind of like, orgasms for people with vulvas. It's like there's no evolutionary purpose for this. Why should we be studying this or understand the clitoris or like?
Right.
And it's
Right.
like you said that it is about pleasure. Like how much we downplay pleasure is as a part of survival or existence, or
Mm.
it's always this secondary thing. So we have this idea of like, oh, science needs to prove the legitimacy of it. I mean, it sounds like an amazing book. I wasn't trying to put down the
Yeah,
book
yeah, yeah.
at all.
Oh
I was
no,
just thinking like, oh, now will people probably, will they actually teach it in psychology classes now?
uh-huh.
I don't know. I
Yeah.
hope so.
No, no. Elliot would very much agree with you, and he writes about stuff like that. Like we shouldn't need these arguments to take it
Right.
seriously. But also, this stuff has been erased, and this science exists too. But actually, I want to ask you about this pleasure because you mentioned your class is called pleasure activism. Like,
Yes.
just briefly, what do you teach in that class that most people aren't getting educated on or haven't been?
Well, it's actually based on the work of Adrienne Marie Brown, who wrote a book called Pleasure Activism, and the idea is that, particularly for marginalized and oppressed people, pleasure is often, secondary or taken away as part of that systemic oppression, and that pleasure is actually empowering and is a way to fight against systemic oppression. So, how do we actually cultivate pleasure and joy, in response to systemic oppression?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of part two to human sexualities for me. It's, human sexualities is kind of like sex ed 101 for 20-year-olds, since none of us got decent sex education. And then pleasure activism is like, okay, how do we take it to the next step? How do we not use language like guilty pleasure, or that it's overindulgent, or, things like rest or taking care of ourselves, is something that we're thinking about, like what does that look like, what is gender pleasure, um, you know
Hmm.
uh, not just sexual pleasure, but pleasure in multiple ways,
Huh.
just with our bodies. And it's very I love teaching that class. It's because
Yeah.
it's very, we're still talking about, here are the problems, here are the issues, right? But then it's like, how do we go towards pleasure in these spaces? And
Hmm.
most of us don't have that conversation.
I love that. Yeah, I want to take your class. That sounds great. I wish I had taken it 20 years ago.
Me too.
Yeah, I never, that's funny. It's like the phrase guilty pleasure. It's like, why does that phrase even exist? Why is there any pleasure that we would like to consider guilty? Uh,
Right. We have to
yeah,
feel bad about it. I mean, that's how we're
yeah,
socialized around sex and in general, but also pleasure is over, it's an indulgence, it's an overindulgence, it's unnecessary for
yeah,
living, where pleasure activism would argue that it is essential, that it is, to we shouldn't just be living, we should be thriving.
yeah, right,
And how do we thrive in those spaces? And of course, you don't want to disregard the systems that are in place that are harming people, but in the process, where do people find joy, where do they find pleasure,
right.
to both to fight against oppression, but also find pleasure in social activism too. That's a big thing that Adrienne Marie Brown talks about.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because
Yeah.
it can be difficult and depressing sometimes, and like, yeah,
Oh
that makes
yeah.
so much sense to be prioritizing pleasure to me, and yet it's not what I was brought up with. That's
No,
like,
I pretty much none of us were. So
yeah, yeah,
there's a lot of unlearning to do, and that idea of like, so I challenge my students. It's like, okay, you want to go do something, you don't try not to put guilty in front of that.
yeah,
Let's brainstorm what brings you pleasure.
right,
How do you not put shame to it? because there's this, it's very, I mean, if you're going to do a huge analysis about production and capitalism and, that we're always supposed to be going and producing. And,
Yeah.
people talk about feeling bad resting, that like, I mean,
Yeah.
if you can't rest, like, how are you supposed to function?
Yeah.
So
Right.
it's a joy.
That's awesome. I hear stuff like that all the time too. And like by support groups I'm part of and groups I've led and in my coaching practice, like, people talk a lot about like the costs of exploring their pleasure or experiencing pleasure or like the risks or is it worth it, and it's this struggle for people and it's hard. And people often, I think, get stuck because they don't view their pleasure as important as other things. But
Right.
it is important.
Yeah.
That was Lisa Spidell. Next up is a clip from Mark Cusack, aka Not Defining, on social media. In this clip, we talked about the asexuality spectrum and how it intertwines with bisexuality and autism, a little more in the episode than in this clip. And Mark also talks about how dating works on the ace and poly spectrums. I think this is just kind of a fun clip, and I think we need more ace awareness. It is a spectrum, and so often we think about asexuality as the extreme. But in this clip with Mark, you'll hear about how important that spectrum is and how the word can be useful to help people understand your experience. And this is a spectrum we don't often talk about when we talk about sexuality, but it's maybe one of the most important spectrums. It's about how much we experience sexuality and how. We often boil things down to gender, but this spectrum is very important too. And what I also loved about this clip is when Mark talks toward the end about blurring the lines between different types of relationships, friendships, sexual relationships, other kinds, how sex and romance need not be the defining feature of all our important relationships or intimate relationships. And I loved how when he talks about just being open to seeing what comes with anyone. It's a really beautiful way of being in relationships. So here's a clip with Mark Cusick. You mentioned that you're ace and on the asexuality spectrum. How did you discover that? And tell us, people who don't know, a little about that spectrum and like where you think you fall on that spectrum and what that means and stuff like that.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I came to my bisexuality quite late, kind of in my 30s, and I came to my asexuality even later, kind of in my mid 30s. It's very, very recent, and it's something I'm still exploring in myself. But basically, for the longest time, being bisexual, I I kind of repressed a lot, and I was always confused about what genders I actually kind of liked and who I was and what. So there was a lot of anxiety and just a lot going on with my bisexuality. I never quite felt that I could be like my true self. And even when I became kind of more open with myself and had relationships and things, I was always, I think, conscious that I was kind of like trying to be something to someone. I was trying to do what you're supposed to do, right? When it comes to dating and relationships and sex and everything. And it wasn't until I actually really started to accept and become confident in my bisexuality that I started to realize, if given the authentic choice, I don't know if I'm that bothered by sex and sexual attraction and dating and things at all, really. And that was really surprising to me. It was really, really surprising. But I learned a lot about the asexual spectrum. Like the bi spectrum is kind of attraction to different genders, and you may be on one side or the other. The asexual spectrum is kind of the presence of attraction or not. And so you might be one end of the spectrum, which is like a sex repulsed asexual, which is like even the idea, the thought of any kind of sexual uh, act would just be really abhorrent. You just couldn't imagine doing it at all. But then you also get people all through the spectrum. You get people who are ace flux, who are kind of like fluid. You get people who are demisexual, who they can have sexual attraction, but they really need to have a close bond with the person first. But the one that I identify most strongly with is known as gray sexual or gray ace. And again, we get into all these labels. Like, we don't need to use the labels, but as we're talking
you're
in
so
detail
defining,
about it,
Mark. You're so defining.
I'm so
can't
defining.
believe how
Somebody on my YouTube
how much
channel,
you're defining yourself.
I was talking about being grey ace, and someone on my YouTube channel like commented, was like, "It's ironic that for an account that calls itself Nuts Fine, you're certainly defining very specifically." And I was like, "Okay."
That's a good act out. I like
I
that
was,
act out right there.
I don't know how they spoke, but this is how I imagined them in my mind. I don't respond to comments like that, but it's just like, the words are the words. I'm not gonna like, define as gray sexual to like, the person on the street. But it helped me to understand that what I experience is actually a thing, and it's actually normal, and it's actually okay. Gray ace is basically, I have the full range of sexual feelings. I am sexually attracted to people. I know what that feels like. I enjoy sex. I've had the great joy of having lots of wonderful sex in my life. Like, I get it. All of it. It's fine. It's lovely. Sex is wonderful. Wonderful. I find people sexy. I find people of all genders sexy. But I don't experience it really that much. I don't really feel that it is something that is a huge part of my life. And I look at other people kind of at similar age to me. I look at most people that I see around me, and sex and sexual attractions is this massive thing. It's this wonderful thing. And it's like, you will seek it and it will be this huge part of your life. And I'm just like, yeah. And I think I've always been like that, but it's been the kind of just the trying to be what I feel that I'm supposed to be, or the kind of the forbiddenness of like same gender attraction. I wasn't out as queer for the longest time, and so I was like, oh, it was this kind of forbidden thing that was very exciting. And then when I kind of was allowed to experience it freely, I was just like, okay, that was nice. So that's really what,
Interesting.
my ace spectrum identity means to me.
That's interesting that the sex, same gender sex was almost like built up so much because you were repressing it. But then when you actually explored it, you're like, okay, that's me and that's normal. But also I'm not like super interested in it. That's kind of interesting that it was like almost had more weight and maybe before you came out. And then once you're out as bi and comfortable with that, you realize, oh, like, well, actually the attractions and the sex are not that important. Like they're there, but they're not. I think that that's something that people, I mean, and for me too, like it's sort of a little counterintuitive. Like if bisexuality means the possibility of attractions to more than one gender, and asexuality means, well, if you think it means no attraction, then how do those combine? Like those seem to be mutually exclusive. But the gray ace thing, I think, is something that many people I've talked to have identified with, where it's like, it's not zero. Like you're not there, it's a spectrum, and maybe you're not like all the way in that bottom corner, but it's just not the same as the way, other people seem to experience it. It's not as important. It's there, but it's not like guiding you fully the way it's guiding me fully. I just follow my penis around most days and see where it takes me.
Yeah, that's a
I'm somewhere
wonderful
else
place
on the
to be.
spectrum.
Yes,
But that
maybe
makes
I'm
sense. Yeah.
maybe I'm a Kinsey one of the ace world.
I
It's
do think
funny.
actually
Yeah,
we need a scale, an ace scale, right? Actually, with some kind of number, because like people think everything's a zero when you talk about ace, but
yeah,
it's a spectrum.
yeah.
You should invent a scale.
The Cusack scale, maybe. There probably
Yeah.
is one. But yeah,
Yeah,
people think
probably.
that bisexuals are like 50-50 and they get out of bed every morning and just like go and have sex with everyone.
Yeah.
Or asexual people are like complete zero and don't even know. And it's just like, no, we're
Yeah.
all a mishmash, in
Right.
between. So I like to say that I could be attracted to anybody because I'm bi, but I'm not really attracted kind of to anyone because I'm ace. So that could be confusing, and I understand that when I
I
say it.
love it. I love the counterintuitiveness. So given that where you are on the A spectrum, like you mentioned when we were talking before this, like that you're single and poly and you're exploring that. Like, so given where you are on the spectrum, what kinds of relationships are you exploring these days? However much you want to get into it.
Mm. Yeah, well, in a way, I'm kind of actively enjoying not exploring relationships, which is
Oh, cool.
really a nice thing, but it's something that people don't understand. Like that. Oh, you have to be trying to meet someone, and it's this assumption, and that's something that I've kind of had in my conditioning my whole life. It's like, oh, you will eventually meet someone, and it'll be there. And I'm really deconstructing that, because I think part of accepting myself as bi and as ace and non-binary, or just not defining, is that authenticity we spoke about before. I, I'm challenging myself to ask the question: if there were no limitations, if there were no expectations and rules in society, if I stopped listening to what everybody tells me I should be or what the convention is, what would I actually want in my life? And it's such a wonderful, freeing question to start each day with. What does
Hmm.
my body want? What does my brain want? Like, what feels good to me? And so I just go with that. And actually, the answer for me at the moment is to not have a significant other, to spend time with my family, who I adore and who are my rocks. I love spending time with my family. I'm an uncle, I'm a godparent, and I just love, that's so important. And then I have amazing friends. I have very intimate friendships, it was like queer, platonic, um, loving, caring friendships. I love, 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 love that. Um, and then I guess it's just a case of, I think, just seeing what every relationship comes, not saying like, this is a friendship or this is a romantic relationship or this is going to be intimate or physically intimate or sexual or sensual. Just seeing, just being really open and seeing what comes. I really fancy, that's a British term. Some people don't get, but I really love couples. I find that I fancy couples all the time, like, and it drives me crazy. And in a way, it suits my bisexuality because, maybe you have like two different people of two different genders. I find that overwhelmingly like wonderful, but
Hmm.
also it it suits my asexuality as well because they already have each other. They've got their thing. I don't want to kind of be that to a person, but I would love to have connections which are fun and intimate and, all the rest of it. So couples are cool. Couples are cool. Yeah,
I
I
love
like
that.
that
I
idea.
love that for you.
Thank you.
That was Mark Cusack, aka Not Defining. One more clip for this episode with my friends Vera and Leroy. I love Vera and Leroy, my friends from Amsterdam, bi activists. They're so fun to talk to. They also have their own bisexual podcast, although it's mostly in Dutch, except for the episode I was on, but you should check it out. I love this clip because you get to see Leroy and Vera's dynamic and how they tell the story of their relationship together. And in this clip, they talk about Leroy coming out to Vera a little bit before he knew what it fully meant, but he knew he had to share something. Vera talks about how that prompted her journey toward her bi identity, which is lovely when that happens. And what I love most of all is how extremely open and accepting Vera was when she heard these things. Doesn't mean she wasn't confused or upset and it wasn't hard. Like, it was hard. They went through a lot of stuff and had a lot of long talks about what did this mean, but they trusted each other along the way. And as Leroy says, Vera's questions came from a place of truly trying to see him and connect with him and curiosity. And her questioning didn't come from stigma or judgments from society. She really just stuck to her mind as opposed to the way the world tells us that relationships should be. And so I love the way she came at that and what that led to for their connection. And they also talk about not making assumptions about what your partner will think or feel before you share something, and especially not letting that hold you back from sharing. Because the reality is, whatever you think that they'll think, maybe they'll think it to some degree, but the reality is always much more nuanced. And there's often, almost always, a lot of love paired with the new feelings of confusion or concern. And there's often a path forward, even if it doesn't seem like there is. So enjoy this clip with Vera and Leroy Devenvoort and Westenberg.
I think at one point that gave me the kind of like trust. That's the word. To include Vera in my journey quite early. Like, obviously, we've always been like this couple together, like a little less makeup, but like I sometimes say like, oh, well, it makes me queer. Whereas like your queerness is not your makeup. It's
all the
in you.
things.
So we've been this couple already. So we already got a lot of questions from people, and we already had to defend our relationship. Like, no, he's not gay. We're really together.
Oh
all
yeah,
of that,
yeah. I heard that
and
many times before you
and
even. Yeah.
all these things like added up to me quite early telling Vera like, so I need to tell you something. I think I'm bisexual, but I don't know what that means yet. And
Yeah.
I don't want to figure that out by myself and then come to you and say, this is a whole package and deal. I want to. Also, I can't because I need, an extra brain to
Process.
One brain is not enough for
no,
this
we
stuff.
need
It's
to
too
bring it
complicated. You need
further.
at least 2 brains.
Yeah,
3 or 4 or 5 brains, even better.
And
Yeah.
so we did.
It's true. Yeah, you really were like, I think I might be bisexual, and I honestly don't know what that means yet. So you really opened up a thing that we could just research together. Basically, I think research might be the right term, and also discover and explore, because so we did a lot of googling and did a lot of thinking, like, what does that mean, what so how do you feel, and we talked a lot about your feelings and also a lot about the struggle and the pain that was underneath all that. And the fact that you could even say this to me was right away, was such a special moment.
And the fears that came from saying that also for you, like, okay, what does this mean for you? What does this mean for a relationship? Like all these questions
Right.
we didn't have answers to yet, but we were
but we weren't
in an
also
okay place.
Yeah, we were. I think we talked about this for like a week full time.
We stopped working. We
Had a
stopped
little
working.
summit, a little buy summit to like address.
Honestly,
We did.
a week-long retreat.
Laptops.
Yeah, we closed the laptops. I think it was in summer, so it wasn't that busy anyway. So we basically did this whole thing for like a week. We locked ourselves up, just talking and hugging and crying and loving and everything.
Thinking,
yeah, it was
and insights.
But also,
how long had you already been together before this?
Quite a while, I
think. It might be 2 or 3 years already.
Okay, cool.
Quite some time. So
cool.
Also, I wanted.
We had
there's a reason also why I did it then. I thought you must know, but like I'm kind of like a I like time slots, like 3 years, for example. It's nice if you want to marry something, maybe. Someone. And so I just really wanted to have this out of the way before I, as that, I tricked myself into kind of like a deadline there.
Oh, you're blushing, Leroy.
It's Mac.
And it's interesting because I just interviewed this guy, Lewis Oakley. He's in the UK. He had this advice of like, if a guy is coming out to his female partner or any partner, but especially a female partner, you want to have an answer for like, how is this going to change your partner's life? And it sounds like at this moment, you didn't really have that answer. I'm curious, Vera, like, how did you handle that? Was it really scary to think like, oh, what does this mean? Or were you kind of like on board in some way because of what was in the back of your mind, maybe?
Yeah, I think I don't jump to conclusions that quickly in life. I'm quite a conceptual person, so making things very concrete and definitive is not something that comes to me very quickly. So I like to think about things quite long, and I love research. So for me, it was not like, oh, you're bisexual, so this will mean this or this and this and this. I figured that it would change a relationship, but I wasn't sure how. I didn't know the storyline on that. And I don't know. I think we just talked about it a lot, and I had a lot of questions, but it was mostly about how do you feel then, and what do you think this means? What does this mean to me? I also, for myself, I at some point after 3 or 4 days of talking about this, I was like, whoa, but what does it mean? What does it say about me and my sexuality that I am attracted to someone who's bisexual? And that uncovered a whole new journey for me.
You went through your mind, you saw your feminine ex-boyfriend, and you were like, what am I attracted to?
Yeah, and also because I before I met you, I sometimes dated people, but not that not so actively. And usually if I were to meet guys in a bar or something, I wasn't attracted to them that much, and I just felt like a disconnect, and I never could put my finger on that until this moment of like, oh shit, maybe it says something about my sexuality in a way that I like gender norms or gender is not important to me, and it's mostly for me about an attraction to people who also see the world like that. So queer people, oh my god, what an epiphany.
Yes,
well, that's what
if somebody takes gender very seriously in not like a hamming it up way, Vera thinks it's very unattractive immediately. And then she got that insight after us having this, like,
interesting.
This makes a lot of sense.
Makes a lot of sense. But all these questions you were asking, and I've been thinking about your question a lot, like over the years, like how did she react? And all of her questions came from a place of feeling and humanity and connection and trying to see your partner. And as you can hear, nothing from society. And I think that is just where Vera kind of lives. She knows how to disconnect from that. But she wasn't asking like, oh, but like what have you been up to then, or what have you like all these things. She could find a place in herself.
Societal norms, I see them, but I don't experience them, I think.
Yeah, that's a nice way to go through life. I love it. I mean, that's many of us are, for many people, it probably takes longer to break them down. It sounds like you just, throwing them out. But that's a really nice, like, it sounds like your questions didn't come from a place of fear of what might happen, but from a place of like genuine curiosity.
And I think I felt fear.
There was fear.
There was absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
There was fear for sure.
Yeah.
But
comforting each other in that fear, not fighting. Not like then then we're gonna fuck it up for sure. We're both scared right now. Like how are you doing?
I think not long before this whole thing, I did a mindfulness course. I think 6 months before this. Don't you think?
You gotta time it, Rob. That's the tip. You gotta time it right after. I don't know.
Get this timeline straight.
Like a lot. Like
and also I read all the books,
and all the things. Like trying to know a lot.
We've always been working on like how do we see? I think I was reading Alain de Botton at the time. Yeah, for sure, something like that. Something about love and how love, the stories about love always end with a marriage and they live happily ever after kind of stories. And I don't really buy into that. And that there's a book, it's called The Course of Love. It's written by Alain de Botton. It's like it's a philosopher. And I think I was reading it out loud a lot to you. Maybe, I sometimes do that. So
it was quite dark, yes, but then we had each other, and this is a point, like sometimes I feel a little bit like a grinder coach or something like that. People who are like, oh, I just I'm a bi without a face, or I'm like I trying to talk to stuff to my partner, and that moment that is it. Like, am I gonna tell it? Am I gonna start a fight, or am I gonna start a conversation? Am I how vulnerable am I gonna, like, what is our base, all these things. I feel very lucky that we worked through that,
and that you could be that vulnerable. That was super great.
You probably learn a lot about your relationship by going through that and realizing what are you comfortable sharing, how does your partner react. And it sounds like you, even though it was difficult and it's scary, you guys got to a place where like you could create a safe space for each other and be really vulnerable, and then that went both ways.
The most difficult thing is not trying to think for somebody else, I think, because if I feel something, want to do something, whatever, like I shouldn't think, oh, but Vera is gonna think this and this and that. First of all, it pisses you off a lot, and also it is usually not as nuanced as that your partner will actually feel and react, and that I think that is that's a little
the true feelings are often much more complicated than what we fear will happen. Oh, she'll dismiss it or be really upset, but maybe there's part of that, but then there's also the love and the caring, and it's complicated.
And embracing that life is complex and doesn't really have a single answer, or that's, I think,
within a conversation, even
within a conversation. Sometimes if people ask me to do a dilemma thing, and I'm like, why, but that's a whole
right.
So, but basically the whole bisexual, this or that, also goes,
it's a gradient.
But it also goes if you talk about topics like this with your partner. It's also not, things are not so set in stone.
It's always fluid and changing. that's it for 2024. Thanks for listening all season. Thanks for checking out this best of. This isn't actually the best of. There are so many other amazing guests we've had this season. I didn't leave them out because they're not the best. You're all the best. I love you all. 2 Bye Guys, Buy One Bye Guy. We'll be back pretty soon. I don't know exactly when. I don't know on what schedule, but we'll be back soon. Happy 2024 into 2025. Wishing you all the best. Here's to a beautiful new year. 2 Bye Guys by 1 Bye Guy is produced and edited by me, Robert Brooks Cohen, and it was created by me and Alex Boyd. Our new logo art is by Caitlin Weinman. Our music is by Ross Mincer. To help support this podcast, visit patreon.com/Robert Brooks Cohen. You'll get full video episodes, early access, and bonus content. Visit robertbrookscohen.com to learn more about my coaching, my book, and my stand-up comedy. And thanks for listening to 2 Bye Guys by 1 Bye Guy.